everybody, and welcome to the Stitch Sessions. We have another scarf tutorial for you. This one is called the Easy Stitch Scarf. And as the name suggests, it's really easy to do. It's just made up of single crochet and double crochet stitches. So if you've gotten to know those stitches, you can certainly do this scarf. We made this one a little bit wider, just so that it can be a little bit more all-encompassing, a little cozier. You can wrap it around a couple of times. You can actually, some people like the idea of kind of using it as a scootie a little bit as well. So yeah, you can wear it any which way you like. And we've had a few requests for some more different scarf designs. So here we are. We are going to learn how to make the Easy Stitch Scarf. So if you want to keep up to date on all of our other tutorials as well as our stitch session conversations, don't forget to press that little subscribe button. In the meantime, let's grab our materials and let's get stitching. This is such a great beginner-friendly project. And I love it because it's a great way to practice your slip knot, chain, single crochet, double crochet. Super, super exciting. It sounds complicated, but it is very easy and fun to do. So I am using the Bernat Satin from Yarnspirations. And this is such a pretty color. It's got these purpley red tones. They're really, really nice. The color is called Plum Mist Heather. And what I love about this color is it would make a great scarf for either a gentleman or a lady or a child. It's great. Fantastic color. So we're going to make a scarf out of this and practice all of our basic crochet stitches. So let's get started. I am using my my favorite size 5 hook. This is a medium 4 worsted weight yarn. It's nice and light, so it's going to be fluffy. Some people might want to actually go up to a 5.5 or a 6 if they like it to stay a little bit loose, a little fluffier. I like my 5, so I'm going to stick with that. So let's get started. We are going to start with our slip knot. And again, if you're still working on how to do the slip knot, I will leave the link in the description box below on how to do a slip knot. There's a couple of different ways that I listed. This is always the way that I do it because it just became super easy for me to do it. So I just insert my hook and turn, yarn over, and pull through, and that's my slip knot. So I'm going to chain 24 for this scarf. So I'm going to yarn over and pull through 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now I've actually chained 36 because this yarn is a little bit thinner in feel. I found that the general 24 chains, which in a thicker yarn would give you a nice width, was a little bit too narrow. So I chained 36, and that gave me just under 8 inches in width for your scarf. So that's the one I'm going to go with in this particular example. So I'm going to chain 36. And we are now going to do a single crochet row. And in order to get the height that we need for the single crochet stitch, I need to chain an additional chain, chain 1, okay? And again, I do have a tutorial on the single crochet stitch, and I'll also put a link to that in the description box below. But right now we've got our chain 1 in the second chain from the hook. So it's not this one, it's the very next one. And sorry, this yarn actually is a bit too dark, but it's so the second chain from the hook, I'm going to insert my hook, I'm going to yarn over, pull through, so there's 2 loops, yarn over, pull through 2. So there I have a single crochet. Okay, so I'm going to do that again into the very next stitch, which is right there, I'm going to insert my hook, pull through, 2 loops on the hook, pull through. So I am going to do this into every single stitch until the end of this row. This will be my foundation row. Okay, so at the end I should have 36 single crochet stitches. Okay, so starting to look like that. So pause the video and I will meet you at the end. I have reached the end of my foundation row and I have counted 36 single crochets. So I know I'm on the right step here. And don't worry, always the first row tends to get a little bit wonky like that. Just sometimes you just need to lay it down, lay it flat, just flatten out your work a little bit. Okay, so you can now see where all your stitches are. Again, the tops of your stitches are those V's there. Those are your stitches. So you've got to the end of your row, into the last stitch there. And so in order to turn, we're going to chain 1 because we're going to continue doing single crochets. Okay, we're going to chain 1. We're going to turn our work. So again, if you're right-handed, which I am, you're going to work from right to left. Okay, if you were left-handed, you'd work from left to right. So I'm going to chain 1 and I'm going to single crochet into the backs of these stitches here. Okay, remember that this first gap there, that first groove, that is the bottom of your chain 1, which represents a single crochet. So what I'm going to do is I am going to skip that one and I'm going to insert my hook into the next groove. So that's the second stitch from the hook. Okay, I'm going to insert my work. Sorry, I'm going to insert my hook and yarn over there, pull through. So again, 2 loops on the hook, yarn over, pull through 2. Okay, I'm going to do that into the next groove there, pull through, pull through. Again, identify the next groove, insert, pull through, yarn over, pull through. Okay, you'll start to feel like what's a nice hold, a gauge. I try to keep it, you know, a little bit looser when I know the yarn is finer because I don't want it to be super tight. Whoops, I'm doing a double there. So I'm just going to insert right away without looping over. I'm going to insert my hook, then yarn over, pull through, yarn over, pull through. So you can see that's starting to square off there now on the end. So basically we're going to do another row of single crochets all the way to the end. You will chain 1, turn your work, and do single crochets all the way to the back again. We are going to do a total of 10 rows of single crochet stitches. And it's fantastic for practicing your single crochet stitch, how to turn your work, identifying the second stitch from the hook, and really seeing how your work can take shape. So again, 10 rows, and then we are going to talk about the next stitch we're going to do. So a fantastic scarf for practicing some of your basic stitches. So pause the video and do your 10 rows, and I'll meet you at the end. And I am just at the end of my 10th row. So one thing I forgot to remind you of is make sure you really look for that chain 1 at the end. It can be really tricky to see sometimes. So again, the best way to figure out if you've gotten all the stitches is to count. So for me, I know I'm going to count my 36 stitches. So if I get to the end and I only have 35, then I know I'm missing something here. And actually you can quite tell that there is a stitch missing. So if you're doing 24, same thing. If you end up with 23, or if you end up with 25, that's also an issue too. You may have stitched twice into the same stitch, or you may have gone into the bottom of the first chain, which we always say we skip that one. So in this case, I need to do one more single crochet at the end. I know that it's in here somewhere, but I can't quite seem to find it. So usually there's a little bump coming out here, which you can see, and I am just going to insert there, yarn over, pull through. Whoops, careful not to split your yarn. So I'm going to try that again. So I can see there's a bump there, so I'm going to insert, yarn over, gently pull it through, yarn over, pull through 2. And there I have my 36th stitch, maybe your 24th for you. Again, at the end of each section, I like to lay my work down, even it out a little bit, flatten it out, and see how it's coming along. I can see that my edges are nice and straight, so I'm on the right track. So again, counting stitches, super important. Now, 10 rows are done. I know it doesn't seem like much. Again, this is a finer yarn, so if you're using a slightly thicker consistency size 4, or maybe you're using a bulky size 5, your 10 rows might be slightly thicker, and that's okay. Okay, so the next section we're going to do is we're going to work on is a section of double crochets. So we've done 10 rows of single crochets. Now we're going to do 10 rows of double crochets. So what's going to happen with the double crochet is we're going to increase the height of our stitch. So where we had to chain 1 for a single crochet, we are going to chain 3 for the height of a double crochet. Okay, so we're at the end here. We're going to chain 1, 2, 3. Now we're going to turn our work, and just as we did before, we are not going to work into that first the bottom of the stitch there, because that belongs to this chain 3, which now represents a double crochet. So we are going to work into this next stitch here. So we're going to skip this one, and we're going to work into the next stitch here. But in order to do a double crochet, this time we need to yarn over first, and then we insert our hook. Again, not at the first one here, but into the second one. We're going to insert our hook, yarn over to pull through, so you have 3 loops on your hook. Now we will yarn over again, and we will pull through only those first 2. So you will remain with 2 loops on your hook. So we are going to yarn over once more and pull through the last 2. And that is what creates our double crochet. Okay, so hopefully you can see that there. Don't worry about this chain 3 at the beginning. It sometimes will, it just curves up a little bit. Once you start working through, it'll straighten out. So we're going to do that again. You're going to yarn over first, identify the next stitch, insert your hook, pull through, 3 loops on the hook. Yarn over again, pull through the first 2 only. 2 loops will remain on your hook. Then you're going to yarn over and pull through the last 2. So we're pulling through twice, a double crochet. And there we have another one. And we'll do that again. Yarn over first, insert your hook into the next stitch, pull through. You'll have 3 loops on the hook. Yarn over, pull through 2, and yarn over to pull through the second 2. And that's what you're going to do all the way till the end of the row. So remember, in this case, you're always going to yarn over first. So unlike the single crochet, we didn't have to yarn over at all before we put our hook into the stitch. With the double crochet, you yarn over first, but you also pull through in stages. You pull through the first stage, which is 2, and the second stage you pull through the second 2. And that is what consists of the double crochet. So what we're going to do is I'm going to leave you to continue to double crochet all the way to the end of this row, and we'll talk about moving on to the next row. We're now coming to the end of our first row of double crochets. So we've got one more stitch that we can see here. So I'm going to yarn over, insert my hook, and do your double crochet. And now sometimes you may be fooled into thinking that this row is done, even though you can see there's a little bit of a bump, but sometimes you're like, well, I can't really see a stitch there. Just like we did with the single crochets, you just sometimes have to pull out your work a little bit, and there's always going to be some little bump effect there. And there we go, we can see a stitch in there. So we're going to yarn over and we're going to insert our hook into that area and pull through. Pull through 2 and pull through 2. So now that we've stretched it out a bit, you can definitely see that we did get the proper stitch there. And as always, if you are unsure, just stop and count your stitches all the way back to the end. In my case, I should have 36 stitches. And you can also see that the side here is fairly straight, so I know I'm on the right track. So you've come to the end of your row, and because a double crochet stitch sits taller than a single crochet, we need to do a few chains to create that height. So with a single crochet, we only chained 1. With a double crochet, which is a bit of a taller stitch, we are going to chain 3. So 1, 2, 3. And you'll turn your work. And be sure not to chain that too tightly because it'll bunch up your work. So just keep it nice and relaxed. And just like we did at the beginning of the row, we want to identify that this first stitch here is the bottom of this chain 3. So we don't stitch into that. That belongs to this stitch. So we will find the next stitch, which is this one here. We will double crochet into that one. So again, we'll yarn over, insert your hook, pull through. You'll have 3 loops on the hook, yarn over, pull through 2, and pull through 2. So here we are again at the beginning of another row of double crochets. And as usual, you've got a little bit of this curvature here, and that is totally normal. So you're going to continue on and double crochet all the way across this row as well. And we will then discuss finishing off the row on top of that chain 3 that we started with last time. So go ahead and finish off this row, and I will meet you back here when we're ready to move on to row 3 of the double crochet rows. Here we are coming up to another end of a row, and now that we've been able to chain 3, the next stitches tend to become a little bit more identifiable as we go to the end. So we can see that our next stitch is right here, so we will double crochet into that one as usual. And now we have our chain 3 stitch here. So we have to make sure we can identify the third chain, which is the top one right there. And that is where we're going to insert our hook to finish off this row. And we will pull through 2 and pull through 2. And now we can see that this double crochet sits nicely on top of that chain 3, which represents the height of a double crochet stitch. So there we are. So we've now done 2 rows, and for this project we want to do a set of 3 more rows. So we're going to do 5 rows in total. So we've done 10 rows of the single crochet stitches, and for the double crochet stitches we're going to do 5 rows. Because these are taller stitches, we're not going to do as many as we did in the single crochets. Once you've done your 5 rows of double crochets, you're going to have something that looks like this. So you've got your 10 rows of single crochets and 5 rows of your double crochets. We're now ready to move on to the next section, which is our final section before we begin to repeat again, and that's the granny shell row. So we're going to begin by chaining 3. And we've done this scarf in multiples of 3. So that's the perfect number of stitches for our granny shell row. Once you've chained 3, we're now going to identify the bottom of this chain 3 stitch that belongs to this. This represents a double crochet. So we're going to skip over that, identify the next one, and we're going to skip this one too. Into this next stitch, we are going to double crochet 3 times into that stitch. So this would be the first one. We're going to double crochet a second time and one more time. And that creates a shell. So 3 double crochets into one stitch create a shell stitch. So as long as you know how to do the double crochet, the shell stitch is pretty easy. To continue on, we're going to now skip the next 2 stitches. So we're going to skip this one and we're going to skip this one. Into the third stitch, we're going to double crochet 3 times again. So every third stitch, we are going to stitch a shell stitch into it. Wow, that's a lot of stitches. A lot of S's, I should say. So 3 double crochets create a shell. And we're going to do that again. We'll skip 2, 1, 2, and into the third, we're going to do 3 double crochets. And that creates our really pretty shell stitch. So you're going to continue on. So it's starting to look like that, really nice. Don't worry about this little curve here. That's going to straighten out with consecutive rows. So go ahead, continue on. You're going to skip 2 in the third one, do a shell. Skip 2 in the third one, do a shell. And you're going to do that all the way to the end. And I will meet you back here. We've come to the end of our first granny shell stitch row. So I have 2 free stitches left plus that top of the chain 3. So the formula is going to remain the same. I'm going to skip these 2, and at the top of the chain 3, which represents a double crochet, I am going to do 1 double crochet. So in the first row of a granny shell stitch row, it is anchored or flanked by 1 double crochet on each side, 1 double crochet post. So if you can see that there, see 1 double crochet post. So this is always the odd row. We're going to go into the second row of the granny shell stitch, and this is where things will change a little bit. We will chain 3 again, turn your work. Now we're going to double crochet into this space we've created here. We're going to double crochet 2 times into that space. So remember, your chain 3 has already counted as 1. So that gives us 3 double crochets creating a shell. So you can see now that this next row is going to be flanked by an actual shell stitch. The first row was flanked with a double crochet or a chain 3. So now when we continue on, we don't even have to count stitches really because we've set it up in the first row. What we're going to do is we're going to do a shell stitch into the next space right here between these 2 shells. So you just insert your hook into the space and continue as usual. There's 1. There's 2. And there's 3. So there you have a shell stitch in between the previous 2 shell stitches, and it should nestle very nicely in between those 2. And we're going to continue on all the way to the end of the row. In each space between the shells of the previous row, you're going to stitch a shell stitch. So that would be 3 double crochets into each space. So you're going to continue on like that all the way till you hit the end of the row, and I'll meet you back there. Now we're coming up to the end of the second row of our shell stitch row. So remember, the first row was flanked by a double crochet here. So we're going to continue as usual like we've done in this row, and we're going to go into this space and put 3 double crochets into it. So we're finishing just like we started, a shell stitch to begin and a shell stitch to end. So now this starts taking a bit more of a nicer shape. So remember before I said don't worry about that little wonkiness on the end? See, they kind of even themselves out. Such a pretty stitch. So this is our segment. This is our repeat, I should say. So row 1 always begins with a double crochet on each stitch. Row 2 is always flanked with a shell stitch on each side. We're going to do this for 6 rows or 3 sets of these. So row 1, you're going to repeat 3 times. Row 2, you're going to repeat 3 times. So the next thing we would do would be row 1, which would be a chain 3, and then do a shell stitch into this space. So you're going to go row 1, row 2, row 1, row 2, row 1, row 2, until you have 6 rows in total. So I'll just start you off the repeat here. We're going to chain 3, and you'll turn. And remember, this is an odd row, so this is going to be flanked with the double crochet. So this represents the double crochet. Sorry if I'm being repetitive. I just like to make sure that I'm clear and that people are with me. So shell stitch into that space. So now it's a little easier. We know that we need to go into all the spaces. We don't necessarily need to count as much. Okay, so there you have it. So this row now matches this row, and we continue on the same. Okay, so you're going to have 6 rows of granny shell stitches at the end of this section. So continue on, and I'll meet you at the end of row 6. Once you come to the end of row 6, you have something that looks like this. So pretty. So we've got 6 rows. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, or 3 sections of double crochet post shell stitch, double crochet post shell stitch, double crochet shell stitch. So it's going to look like that. That's the end of our design setup. So we have a section of granny shell stitches, double crochets, and single crochets. And you're just going to keep repeating that. Singles, doubles, grannies. So to continue on here, now if I'm going back to my single crochets, I'm going to chain 1 and turn my work. And so now I'm going to single crochet all the way across, and this will also help me solidify to make sure that I still have the same number of stitches. For me, that would be 36. It might be 24 for you if you did your scarf a little bit more narrow. Because my yarn was a little bit more fine, I opted to do 36 stitches just to give me a little bit more width. So I've chained 1, and remember I'm going to skip that first stitch because that's actually the bottom of my chain 1. I'm going to go into the very next stitch and do a single crochet. And I'm going to do a single crochet into each and every single stitch all the way across. So I'm not going to work into any spaces. I'm going to work into all the stitches. And this helps to kind of bring back any stitches that were a bit overstretched or getting a bit too wig or getting a bit too big. And so here we are, single crochet all the way around, all the way to the end. So from there, and as you can see, I've actually already worked my scarf a bit. So I've got my granny shells, my doubles, my singles, my granny shells, my doubles, my singles, and I've already got quite a bit of length. I still have a ways to go, but this is how this is looking here. Super pretty. So it just gives you a little bit of detail and just a little bit of interest. So what you're going to do is you're going to repeat those 3 sections until you have the length of the scarf that you want. And what I'm going to do is I do like to always finish off with a nice little border around a lot of my projects. So go ahead, create the length that you want, and then meet me back when you're done, and we're going to talk about putting a border on this really, really pretty and easy scarf. So I have finished my easy stitch scarf. Isn't it pretty? I love this design. So this measures approximately 60 inches, which is a general length that I like for scarves. And it wraps around my neck, and both of the ends fall below my hips. So, and I made this a little thicker, wider than I think most scarves, just because the texture of the yarn was just a little bit finer, so I thought it would just give it a little bit more bulk. So we've got rows of granny shell stitches, double crochets, and then single crochets. So this was a great project to practice your basic stitches, and I think it came out really pretty. So now I've actually gotten a little ahead of myself here. I've started just doing a single crochet border around the edge just to give it a little bit of a finishing touch. So I'm just going to go over how I go around the corners here. So let me just grab my hook. So as you can see, I have already done the border around here, just a fine border, because I wanted to keep this scarf pretty simple, nice and basic. So single crochet, and then what I did as I came around the corner here, I put 3 single crochets into that corner stitch there. Okay, so we did that all the way, so it just gives it a nice little seal there. And I am going to take us, oops, I guess I unraveled a few of these. I'm going to take us to this next corner here to show you exactly how I did it. So I continue. This is actually, this side here is actually the bottom of the scarf, and it's where I started. So this is actually, I'm going into my foundation chain row here. So this is the bottom of my work. So here the stitches are actually still quite easy to find. And again, if you're ever uncertain, always make sure to go back and count. Make sure you didn't miss a stitch, and make sure you didn't accidentally stitch twice into the same stitch. So I am now, that's my chain 1 turn here. So that is my corner stitch now. Okay, so that's the last stitch before I come around the side. So I am going to do 1 single crochet, another single crochet into the same stitch, and you can see kind of that it's already starting to go around that corner. Some people would just do 2. I like to do 3 myself because it just allows those stitches to go around the bend there. So you can see that that's nicely rounding that edge. And now I will continue on. So we're working into the side of our work here, and this is where it can sometimes get a wee bit tricky, because it's like, where do I put my hook? Where do I stitch? Right now, these are the sides of the single crochet rows. And oh, by the way, let me back up. So the design was to do single crochets, double crochets, granny stitch. So when I came to the end here, I wanted to make sure that I ended with rows of single crochets. So normally after my granny stitch row, I would do single crochets and then double crochets. So what I did is, normally I would do 10 rows of single crochets. I did about 3 rows of single crochets, and then I jumped into the double crochets. So I did my 5 rows of double crochets, and then I did the other 7 of the 10 rows of the single crochets, because usually we do 10 rows at the top. And this way it's much more uniform on each end. So each end of this scarf has single crochets at the end. And you can't really tell too much unless you look really closely, but most importantly, you want to see that there is a granny shell row And then there's these doubles and single crochet stitches that just kind of cap off the end of the scarf. So just a little side note there. Okay, so speaking of sides, working into the sides of stitches, this is what can get challenging. Right now we're going to work into the side of these single crochets. This is actually probably the easiest stitch to go into because really the height of a single crochet is 1 chain. So basically you can pretty much see where the side, the turning side of each single crochet row is. So I'm just going to find a spot there. That's basically the end of my row, and I'm going to single crochet. Then I can find the edge of the next row, which is right there, and I'm going to single crochet. And I just keep going down the way there, all the way through each row. Whoops, some of them are a little tight. Each row of the single crochet rows. So for the most part, you're going to be kind of like, wow, this is smooth sailing, going through each of these rows here. And as you can see how nicely that rounded out around the corner just gives it this beautiful little finish. Okay, one more single crochet row. And now you can see I'm starting a row of double crochets. So the general rule is that a double crochet is usually the height of 2 single crochets. So just to keep it uniform, what I like to do is I will find the middle somewhere here. So this is a chain 3 turn. So I'm just going to find a middle in here. I'm going to insert my hook and I'm going to do single crochet as usual. So I usually do 1 in the center of the stitch and then 1 at the base of the stitch. And that just helps me stay consistent with where on that double crochet I'm going to insert my hook. Now some people, see how it creates a little gap there? Some people might just go twice into that gap and then move on. So there's your 2 single crochets, which there's absolutely nothing wrong with it. For me, going into the space just kind of pulls it a bit more and creates a bigger gap. And so I just like it to melt in a little bit more into the side of each stitch. So I actually try and go into the side of these stitches and then in the base of this stitch. So then in the next one I go in the center of that stitch and then, whoops, can be a little bit slippery, and then in the base of that stitch. So I continue to do that all the way through, and in fact when you come to the granny shell section, it's going to be the same thing because granny shells are made up of double crochets. Okay, so here we are. This is the first row we started with the granny shell stitch. So you're going to try to find a nice comfortable place. Sometimes it's difficult to try and find a spot that doesn't have only one strand. I kind of try and like to see if I can get 2 strands there just to make it a little stronger. It doesn't always happen, but okay. So now I'm in the side of a shell stitch. So I'm going to find the base as best I can, insert, and now I'm going to go in the middle here. So somewhere in that chain 3, and I continue along, and then in the base. And that is it. That's how you continue on down the way doing your border row of this scarf. It's got a little extra gap there. And it just adds a nice little, just a great ending, a little cap off to this fabulous easy stitch scarf. So I'm going to get you to go ahead and go all the way around your scarf. I've already started from this end, so I'm a little bit ahead of the game here. But when we reach the end, I will meet you here and we'll fasten off and we will have our fabulous easy stitch scarf done. And we are just coming up to the corner we started with. So we just have one more single crochet And then you can either slip stitch here like this and fasten off, or what I like to do is the seamless end here. So I'm just going to get the scissors and snip my yarn, and then with a darning needle I am going to pull that right through. And so I don't do this all the time, but I like to do it when I have items that I like to have a really nice smooth finished seamless edge. So I'm gonna find that last or the first, depending on how you look at it. This was the first single crochet I did when I did the whole border. So I'm just inserting the needle, just going through those 2 loops, and I'm pulling it through. Whoops. And then what I'm going to do is the last single crochet I did, sorry, the yarn is a bit too dark here. The last single crochet I did, I am going to insert the hook right at the top of it, right down the center of it. Okay, so it's going to come out the bottom of the stitch. And then I just gently pull that in. And if you look at it, it just looks like a regular stitch. You can't even tell where the join is. Hopefully you can see that. I know the yarn is dark here. And then what I do, so you don't want to pull it too tight. You just pull it enough so that it just kind of falls in uniformly with the other stitches. And then I just kind of solidify it in the back here. I just kind of weave my ends in just ever so gently, back and forth, and hide all of my ends, weaving that in there. And then you are pretty much finito. So I like to go back and forth, and that just helps to really secure that end in there. A couple of times is plenty, but I always like to really make sure that things are nice and secure. And I think maybe, just because I'm a little paranoid, I am going to weave that back in one more time. And then just once more through here. And there you have it. So I'm going to just snip that little end, and we have finished our easy stitch scarf. So it now has a nice little border around it, just to kind of solidify it all. I'm not going to do anything with the ends here. You know, some people like to put tassels or pom-poms, things like that. I'm just keeping this one nice and simple, just to kind of accentuate the granny shell design. And that is the easy stitch scarf. So lovely. I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial and you found it easy enough to follow. So I look forward to seeing you on the next stitch session, and make sure to subscribe so you can stay up to date on the latest tutorials and stitch session conversations. See you next time.